welcome all. Thank you very much for spending this time with us. We're due to run somewhere under the hour. We'll see how we go and how much to and fro you guys require from us. So without further ado, I will pass you on to Phil at this point, and we'll be back with you after he speaks, also to talk a little bit more about other projects and events we've got coming up. Thanks, Phil. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Andy. Welcome everyone, Morena. Lovely to have so many join to hear more about our Climate Action 2025 project. So as Andy says, I'm part of the projects and advisory team at SBN. I've had a particular interest in climate-related activities and issues for many years. So really pleased that we as SBN have initiated this really focused effort on climate action. Just going to share my screen with the presentation I'm going to run through. So this is, today we've also released a background report on Climate Action 2025. That is now available on the SBN website. I'll give a link through at the end. There's really, hopefully a really good sort of summary of what the problem is and what we're trying to do to address some of the challenges of engaging smaller businesses in this really important mission. So is this coming? Yeah, here we go. So I'm going to give a bit of background, the big picture on climate, particularly in relation to New Zealand's position, sort of roles for business. Business has a critical role to play in obviously how we address the climate challenge and reducing our carbon emissions. Touch on some of the particular barriers and opportunities that SMEs face, and that's been informed by some research that we've done, qualitative research we've done, interviewing a lot of people who have good experience in this area to kind of get their perspectives on what the barriers and opportunities are. I'll introduce the concept of this climate action pathway, which is kind of the foundation of our approach within Climate Action 2025, as to how to effectively engage with more smaller businesses in taking action. I'll go through in summary what we're aiming to do with the program, and then there's how you can get involved, and as Andy says, we'll have time for questions and hopefully answers. So yeah, please add your questions as we go through. Cool. Okay, so in terms of, I must of course acknowledge we're really pleased that we've recently had 2 organisations join us in being funding partners, sponsors for the work we're doing. So that's ECA, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, and Waka Kotahi NZ Transport Agency. So really delighted that they've given us kind of initial funding to help us get the program going. We are looking for more, and I'll touch on that later. So in terms of the big picture, Andy mentioned obviously the impact of the virus, and it's been interesting how the lockdown and the reduced activity, particularly in transport, has likely to have had the one silver lining potentially of this very dark cloud is its probably short-term impact on reducing our carbon emissions. And this is a scene unprecedented, I think, in everybody's experience in Auckland, of seeing the motorway without a vehicle on it. So yeah, it's a small, as I say, a small silver lining on a pretty dark cloud of COVID. But it does, as there's been a lot of coverage in the press and media about the opportunities for a kind of green recovery. And we're obviously strongly advocating for that, along with many other groups. And hopefully those voices that collective voice will be heard, and we'll have a recovery which is focused on long-term sustainable outcomes. Okay, so in terms of our emissions, I'm anticipating we've got quite a range of people with different knowledge of this area. So I thought I'd just start with this. So this is our emissions breakdown for New Zealand. It's quite an unusual emissions profile because it's dominated by agricultural emissions, particularly on farm from our livestock, our main, cattle and sheep, in terms of methane and nitrous oxide. So that makes us quite unusual as a developed country. There's very few that are like us in that respect. Energy is the next biggest contributor to our overall emissions, and there's some good and bad news in that. The good news is that we have very low electricity emissions from electricity generation because we have very high levels of renewable electricity, but we have very high transport use and emissions from transport, very, very high by international standards, vehicle per capita. And that is the area that has grown the most in the last couple of decades, 3 decades. Nearly doubled. Emissions from road transport have nearly doubled in the last 30 years. So that's a really strong, urgent focus area for action. And certainly smaller businesses have a role in that. And then there are some of the other contributors there, including waste. Waste is a relatively minor, that is just waste from the actual landfilling of waste. That obviously doesn't cover, wasteful practices in production and poor use of resources, which is a big contributor to overall emissions from our lifestyles. So as I mentioned, our gross emissions or emissions have gone up. They've gone up by 25% since 1990. So they have stabilized in the last 10 to 15 years. So that is good, but we need to reduce them radically. And this is a useful diagram which kind of shows where we need to be. This is from an international agency which monitors the emissions performance of all nations, and this is the graph for New Zealand, and it shows the where we are and where we need to be. The different coloured bars are the sort of different target levels we have, and we want to really be in that lighter green target area by 2030 and then 2050. I'll just sort of expand on this because this is worth emphasizing. Our current target within the Paris Agreement is that black dot on the right-hand column there. We need to be down there by 2030. That's, obviously only 10 years away. So we need radical reduction in our greenhouse emissions over the next decade. So there's talk of net zero by 2050, which is a good target, but it shouldn't mask the urgent need for reductions in the next 10 years. Okay, so yeah, I mentioned the Zero Carbon Act. Actually, 6 months ago today, it was passed, so a real achievement. It's not perfect, but it's a really important first step. It lays a good framework based on the UK model of how to reduce emissions and address this challenge. It establishes the Climate Change Commission, which it has a role to kind of oversee and advise the government on how to achieve the net zero by 2050 target in terms of carbon and long-lived greenhouse gases. So that's good news, but we need a lot more. There's currently quite weak policy as a set of policies to actually help us achieve that. So that's really the challenge that we face as a nation, is to enact policies that will make that difference. So in terms of business and climate, there is, the good news is there's certainly opportunity. There is undoubted business opportunity arising out of this challenge. There are ways that businesses can exploit or take advantage, benefit from the need for action. So, there are new business models and products that will help with this, address this challenge. There are examples of, things like new sharing models of use, including transport and vehicles, the rise of things like e-bikes, the rise of, or the provision of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, One of our members, Charge.net, has really led the way in New Zealand to enable people to buy EVs and be confident that there will be a charging infrastructure available nationwide. Efficiency improvements. There's undoubted benefits in terms of cost reductions from being more efficient, particularly with energy use. One of our members who we feature in the report, Saw Printing, they've been working on this for 10 years. They estimate that they've saved $500,000, which has been a net benefit in terms of that investment over those 10 years in various sorts of actions. So there's undoubted opportunities for efficiency improvements. A key one that's probably growing in importance is the recruiting and retaining talent. Younger people are more aware of this issue. They recognize its importance, and hence they want to work for companies that they feel are taking this challenge seriously. So that's a really good motivator for businesses to take action. And aligned to that is obviously appealing to consumers, both in a B2C way, business to consumer, and business to business. And this is a key part of what we want to do in terms of Climate Action 2025, is accelerate the need for procurement policies of particularly larger businesses and government to factor in to a greater degree the sustainability of the products and services they buy. New investor expectations. Recently, a couple of days ago, there were a couple of people interviewed on Radio New Zealand talking about the change, the fundamental change in minds of many large-scale investors over what they will invest in now, and that is a bit of a sea change over the last few years. So that is a trend that will just get more important. So that's a real motivator for businesses to make sure they're ahead of that curve. And related to that, there's a strategic risk management aspect. That's partly about making sure you're going to keep getting good investment, but it's also making sure that your business is prepared for what will inevitably be some of the climatic changes which will affect New Zealand and therefore our businesses. So there are opportunities. Many larger businesses are engaged. 2 years ago, the Climate Leaders Coalition was established. This now has 115 signatories who've signed up to take action. And collectively, that group represents 60% of New Zealand emissions. So it includes Fonterra, so it includes a lot of that farm-related emissions. It includes Z Energy, a lot of the road transport-related emissions. So it's a really good start, and they've signed up to these types of actions, report on their greenhouse emissions, set targets that are grounded in science, what are called science-based targets, assess their climate change risks. And the other two are really important, is supporting their staff to help them reduce their emissions, and B, and this is a thing we want to emphasize through this program, is support suppliers. So that's a pretty key part of what we're looking to do. So SMEs have an important role to play. It's not just about, the larger business and government set the kind of framework, the systems, but SMEs need to be part of the overall solution. 99% of our businesses are smaller businesses under 50 full-time equivalent employees, and collectively the sector represents around about a third of our collective gross domestic product. We don't know precisely how much emissions the sector contributes, but broadly it will be in line with GDP, so it's probably in that sort of ballpark of a third collectively. But SMEs face barriers. The typical smaller business is run by a business owner manager, very busy, just keeping the business running. So they have time resource constraints. It is difficult for them to find time to take action like climate action, or to think about it. they have to be quite well motivated to do that. So I'll touch on a bit more about how we're going to kind of help overcome that barrier and these other barriers. Lack of knowledge and understanding, that's another key one. So these barriers were things that were identified through our research that I mentioned earlier. So it's lack of knowledge and understanding, as well as the time. Inadequate drivers of motivation. This kind of goes back partly to regulation, limited regulation and policy environment, but it also goes back to the limited procurement incentives. You know, large-scale buyers are not really requiring suppliers to demonstrate generally being sustainable and taking action on climate change. To some degree, there's an element of complacency or a lack of thinking that their business may already be low emission. But all activity, a lot of activity has emissions associated with it. So that goes back to the need for better understanding to kind of remove that complacency where it does exist. There's also very limited sort of case studies that taking climate action for a smaller business is not normalized in any way at this stage. We in our network have some really good leaders and pioneers in this space, but we are a relatively small network. You know, there are tens of thousands of smaller businesses out there who don't really see others to, you know, look up to in this respect. So we want to make a change in that area as well. And to some degree, some have indicated that they don't take action because they think that there might be, if they don't do it right, or they, you know, they fall victim to kind of the greenwash claim that they're making false claims. So some, you know, don't take action because of that risk of publicity. So there's a set of barriers, and collectively we've designed this program to begin to address some of those barriers for smaller businesses. So concept of this is the climate action pathway. So we want to recognize that businesses, smaller businesses, will have different motivations, statuses, interests, etc. Given that they're time poor, they want any advice they give are given to be easy and simple, and that's a pretty key part of our approach. So eventually, you know, we're talking about this idea of a climate action pathway, and that journey, if you like, starts with actually having the motivation. So how do business owners actually get motivated to act? There's the you know, sort of the intrinsic motivation. You know, their kids might come home from a climate march and ask questions about what their, you know, parents are doing in their business to tackle climate change. So that's much more of an influence, I suspect, these days. And then there's the more external, extrinsic type of motivations, you know, through things like regulation, the Zero Carbon Act, and you know, consumer expectations. This is the Better Futures report, which identifies that you know, for many consumers, they do reward companies that take action in some way. So there are those external drivers. As I say, each business is different. They have different statuses, interests, opportunities, different constraints. So we need to, you know, design this climate action program with that in mind. Really important is the first step. You know, how do we, because it's often the first step that's the most difficult. So how do we encourage businesses to take that first step? And obviously the motivators are important there. At the moment, it can be quite, in our eyes, it can be quite difficult to make that first step and have the motivation to act. If you do, you know, if someone does a Google search on, say, carbon footprint in New Zealand, they'll get a list of search responses, but in terms of sort of filtering what is most appropriate for them, that's quite a bit of work to kind of go through the list There are a number of really, really good providers of different climate carbon related services, but for a time poor business owner, manager, that's quite a big piece of work to do. And often that can be, you know, the first barrier. So this first step becomes too high and can lead to, you know, just too hard basket, wait for another day, wait for some more urgent imperative to come become apparent. So we are looking for the idea that we will provide advice through this program that is very specific to the individual needs of businesses. So this is quite a busy diagram, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but the concept is there are different areas of taking climate action, whether you're understanding your footprint, whether you're actually taking action to reduce the emissions from the activities you're taking, whether you're looking to offset, mitigate the sort of unavoidable emissions, say by buying credits or tree planting or whatever it might be. And then a really important one, which has had quite a low profile until quite recently, is the whole idea of climate adaptation from a business perspective, and that risk management approach and preparing for climate changes. So they're the types of areas that we want to cover within this. And then within each of those, we've got the concept of, you know, different stages of the journey. These are just illustrative, but, you know, you can be starting out, business can be starting out on action, or it's, you know, done those first steps and it wants to move to the next stage. And then, you know, all the way through to being a real leader, and, you know, measuring your footprint, having it certified, having a robust action plan, you know, buying certified carbon credits that might make you, give you a carbon neutral status, which a verified status, which has marketing value. So there's, we want this program to cover all these things, but to be delivered in a way that is not overwhelming to businesses and is very focused on their needs. So hence the Climate Action 2025 program. That's what we're trying to do, accelerate climate action by SMEs. This is just kind of restating what our target audience is. You know, typically businesses and people in general will follow new innovations, technologies, ways of working in this sort of way over time. You know, there'll be the innovators, the early adopters, and then moving into the majority. To date, most of the people who are taking climate action are probably this early adopter type group. We want this program to help overcome what is called the chasm, and that is the step to get the early majority involved. And the early majority are really important because they're the sort of people and businesses who will move if it's easy, but they want a hassle-free solution. They need it to be simple and easy. And that's really what we're trying to do with this program, is make it simple and easy for SMEs to get involved. So in terms of the program elements, these are them. There are 6 prime parts of the program. The foundational piece really is the online toolkit. I'll talk a bit more in detail about what that is. To support that, we'll have, you know, capability building, training, workshops, what we're calling CO2 labs, to actually provide good practical advice to businesses on how they can take climate action in all its forms. We'll be having strong communications, case studies, to normalize and profile those who are taking action. They don't need to necessarily all be the leaders. They can be those who are on the journey. They just need to be examples that other businesses can feel connected to. And we've got our Sustainable Business Awards that this year will feature 2 new climate action related awards. So they're new this year. So that will be another powerful kind of way for businesses to feel motivated to take action. We want to be able to report impact for this program, really important. So we'll be developing impact reporting mechanisms. We want, part of that will be the idea of signing up to some sort of pledge for businesses. And we're looking at options for that and how they might link with existing, similar existing frameworks such as the Climate Leaders Coalition. Advocacy is a really important part of it, particularly in relation to encouraging improved procurement practices for larger businesses and government that are going to support those smaller businesses taking the lead on climate. So that's a really important part of what we want to do with this program, and get that collective voice for the smaller business sector to encourage that sort of driver from larger businesses and government. And then we'll obviously have a strong governance and support framework for what we're trying to achieve. This is a multi-year, 5-year program we're looking at the moment. So we want to make sure that we're, delivering over that period and making progress towards what we're trying to do. The online toolkit, very important aspect, as I said, foundational. It will cover those action areas that I showed on the pathway diagram. The process, and this is a really important part, and this is related to making sure we're offering tailored advice. We'll be using an online self-assessment tool, which users of the tool will be able to go in, answer some simple questions, which will help us to understand what their capacities, status, needs, interests are, and then we'll provide sort of simple step-by-step advice. Not making it too complicated when you're starting out, making it nice and achievable to enable them to take that important first step. Another really important part of this is we don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We want to use signpost to the good existing tools and resources that are already available. So we see this very much as a hub, and we want to, signpost off to those who can provide some more detailed tools and resources in terms of measuring footprints, getting certification, etc. And we have some very good, good quality products and services that are provided by some of our members, likes of Toy2 and Ecos and others who can, provide that. In terms of the technical coverage, initially the tool will focus on those activities that are relevant to most businesses. So things like transport, freight, business travel, energy use in buildings, electricity use, any heat production. I mentioned freight, cutting down on waste or improving waste management practices, all those sorts of things that are common to most businesses. So that will be the initial release, which we're aiming for the third quarter this year of the initial release of the toolkit. And then over time, we'll be developing more specialized parts of the toolkit, which might address, different sectors and specialized activities. I mentioned about our awards, really important. So this is our big awards night in Shed 10 every November. Not sure we'll be having this kind of thing this year, but the good news is that we will have 2 climate action related awards to help profile those who are leaders in this space. These are taken from our the background reports I mentioned. This is just a selection of some of the members in our network who have been taking climate action for a number of years. So we want to continue to profile the likes of these companies and recognize the work that they're doing, and, as I say, showcase them as normalize what they're doing. This is our program for this year. This month is all about the launch activity, but also starting the design of the toolkit. As I said, we're looking to design and deliver that by August time. And then we'll also be, developing the other parts of the program, the capability building. We're having the workshops in September, October, the CO2 labs. We'll be profiling those taking climate action on an ongoing basis. We'll be developing the impact reporting and the pledge and things like that over the next few months as well. So this is taken from the report, so you're welcome to look at that in more detail if you're so inclined. Yeah, it's a pretty full program, and it does need us to get more support. As I mentioned, we've got our initial funding partners to really deliver all this in a very effective way. We're still looking for more support. So that's a call out that we'd like to make. I won't go into detail here, but this is also taken from the report, and this basically shows what we're doing with the program and its overall design is going to address the barriers that I mentioned earlier. So that's the message, really. Join us in climate action. We recognise that this is a collaborative effort. We need to, as a sector of smaller businesses, we need to get everybody, involved, get support from larger businesses and government agencies who can help us in the mission. So, as I say, we're delighted we've got ICA and Waka Kotahi as our initial partners, and we are actively seeking more. So in terms of ways that you can help with our collective, the net zero mission, is partner with us, assist with technical development. So there's lots of work to do in that space. When we get to the point where we'll be releasing the online toolkit, businesses can actually then join the action program at that stage. But before, we're keen for, hear from those who are interested in the program. General call out to support those SME pioneers who are already taking action, and generally help us spread the word on the importance of getting the smaller business sector engaged in this overall work and mission. This is so this background report is now available on our website. The easiest place to find it is under that What's New tab at the top left there, sustainable.org.nz. So please, take a look at that, download it, and have a read through. And we're really look forward to having more people involved in the program. So please register your interest, get in touch with me. My email address is there. That's it. Hopefully that's been a bit of an intro to what we're doing, and hopefully there's a few questions. Andy.
Thank you very much, Phil. Fantastic. We've got some questions coming in, but one of the things I wanted to sort of start off with is to say, in terms of the SME, like the small business looking for solutions in this space, what are we trying to do that's different that they haven't seen before? And how, we talked about that climate action pathway, how are they going to experience it? Could you run us through kind of a quick example of, say, I'm a small business, I'm looking for some help on this, what they're going to experience when they come across climate action?
Absolutely, and this is fundamental to what we're looking to do. It is, whatever mechanism they've, we'll be obviously promoting this, and we'll be also promoting this through our partner channels, which is a really important way of extending the reach of what we're doing. So once we've got them connected into the toolkit, the initial presentation will be this kind of self-assessment. So we'll be, and that will be very simple set of questions which will basically help us understand what their particular interests, status, constraints, etc. are, what type of business they are, and then based on that we'll be providing a small number of actions that they can take. So that could be as simple as, well, just have a think about how you're transporting people and goods. You know, what are you using? Is that done in a sustainable way? What are opportunities to improve? You know, we've seen with this lockdown how the idea of online meetings is now completely normalized. So when we come out of lockdown, you know, I hope that we'll have a much, we'll think much more before we jump on a plane to go to other cities, and make sure we utilize this good technology and avoid some of those emissions from that particular, you know, activity. So that kind of thing, Andy.
Awesome. And the cost model, are we looking at free point of access or a fee paying, or do they have to be SBN members to take part? How are we looking at that?
No, don't have to be SBN members at all. That's, you know, that won't enable us to reach the sort of coverage that we want and to normalize it across many, many more businesses. It is intended to be free, and certainly in terms of the core offering, because, you know, that cost is a barrier. So we don't want to, you know, add that barrier to the approach. And yeah, but that's dependent on us getting funding to do what we need to do. So, but certainly the core part will be free.
Cool. And in terms of scale of the program, what is it? Because we've done a bit of research, haven't we, in the background of what SMEs are looking for and what those barriers are. Can you kind of highlight again the specific differences of what we're offering compared to like the Climate Coalition, that sort of larger end of the town above the sort of 300 staff member limit? What is it that SMEs really need, do you think, that we're offering here?
I think they just need to demystify the issue, to understand what their role is in playing a part. They don't need to be overwhelmed with too much technical detail. They need to understand the basics of what the problem is and what opportunities they have to be part of the solution. They need to have the motivators to act. That's really important. So, you know, we need to make sure that they can see the benefits of taking action. So that's a really important part of what we're trying to do. But yeah, they obviously don't have, you know, larger businesses increasingly have dedicated people, sustainability managers or such like, who can lead this sort of work. Smaller businesses don't have that. So we've effectively got to, you know, provide that sort of capability for them.
Cool. And how, can you talk a little bit about how crucial you think this is in this context in terms of business resilience and survival? Because obviously SMEs are out there right now going, how do I keep the wheels on? How do I keep this business going, or pivot it in a way that works? How much do you think the climate and carbon emissions part is going to be a crucial part of that story?
I think it's going to, over time, it's going to become more important and more recognized. And, you know, as we see more climate related events happening, you know, weather related events that are attributed to some degree to a warming climate, then, you know, it will be more obvious why they need to take action. But as I say, the external signals need to be there as well. So, and they need to have the support of, you know, good, simple advice on what to do. Emerging one is definitely the, you know, how they incorporate some of that climate risk elements into their business planning. Yes, they have short-term, you know, high priority short-term needs, but I think increasingly, and the pandemic's probably in some respect helped in getting this point across, that there also needs to be that longer-term kind of risk management understanding, and the climate risk will be an important part of that longer-term risk management.
And you talked a bit about how SMEs kind of exist in a framework that's largely defined, or the powers are defined by the big business procurers and by government. To what extent do you think that we can kind of collectively rattle that cage or alter it? And how much of this program do you think, we talked about advocacy, but how much of this program do you think will be focused on that, and how will that function? Were we going to get people together and do that work?
Yeah, I mentioned before the Climate Leaders Coalition and the fact that they have signed up to, support their suppliers. So that is, that opens a big door for us to really make sure that that is delivering on the commitment that is on paper. So we, I guess because it's harder to get a group of smaller players together to have that influence. So we want to play that, be that sort of collective voice. We know that government ministries who are working in this space recognise the need for this sort of change in procurement. The likes of MB, the Ministry for Business Innovation and Employment, they want to make, as I understand, make changes in this area, but it's not going to happen overnight. They've obviously got other priorities at the moment, but yeah, it's so urgent that is, becomes a major part of the change that's needed.
How much business leadership, we obviously, as working for SBN and being involved in all the time, we see a lot of kind of business leadership in this. Especially for the awards, we see the exemplars and the models come forward. To what extent do you think those are well exposed now and taking those strong positions? And is it, can we support that more? Is there something within this about seeing more of those people, being able to trip off the top of your tongue, the people that you think, wow, they're doing it for real?
Yeah, absolutely. We do it through our SBN network and others working in this space. Also do some important profiling, but it's relatively marginalised. I think another key part of our overall strategy with this program is to engage with partner channels or partners and use their channels. So we won't just be relying on this information and these case studies being available through the Toolkit and our own channels, but through partner channels, including larger businesses who we hope to get involved in this. So they are, they obviously have strong relationships with their smaller business suppliers and customers. So that's a really good opportunity. And it ties back into the commitment that they've made. There's opportunity there, and we know that larger businesses are much more ready to do this sort of thing. So we've had interest from some major financial institutions about this approach, and they're very keen to explore the opportunity.
That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? If we could get, large financial institutions, the people that are already supporting and in amongst the small and medium-sized enterprises working with us, and getting in touch with their businesses and the tools. It'd be very directly linked then. Just the last few questions as we go. The last ones I was going to talk about was, how dramatic do you think the change inside a small business needs to be? Because obviously there's a little bit of fear there in terms of how radical they'll need to change, but also it's a beautiful opportunity, because we talked about how radical the change needs to be in the next 10 years across the economy. How do you think that's going to look inside some of these small businesses, and what are the sort of things people can expect they might have to really look at?
Yeah, I mean, it's, and I've talked a lot about the external influences on a business, but there is that opportunity, obviously people work in businesses and people will have these interests. So if they can internally effect a change, that's important. So I think that's an important part of the driver for change. In terms of the changes that they'll see, I mean, there's a continuum of change required. I mean, in terms of business models. So for some businesses, they might be thinking about radically different business models redesigning products, etc. For some, it might be more about improving the efficiency of existing processes and products. So there's a big range there. I mean, the real low-hanging fruit opportunity is on the transport side, I think, and sort of energy use within the system, within the business itself. But the supply chain is really important. That's, you know, once they've kind of understood their core operational impacts and taking steps to address some of those, then to think more about the supply chain and how the inputs into their systems and processes are, you know, how emissions intensive they are, and take action there.
Sure thing. And do you think, where are they going to be sort of encountering this in the media? I think we've kind of talked about some media partnerships that might be coming up that we might be able to flow this into. And obviously we're looking for more, because getting that message out there and consistent is a big part of the picture. So where are they going to be sort of picking this up, do you think?
Yeah, we're actively in discussions with a major media partner, and that would be really important to help normalize, you know, that word again, normalize this sort of action. So yeah, we're looking to encourage that and get that delivered.
Cool. And talking about the research, we just had a question coming about the research, just learn a little bit more about that. How do we go out and kind of test the temperature on SMEs on this? What was the process, and kind of, can you touch again on some of the things you found out?
Sure. It was as I mentioned before, qualitative. So it was based on, you know, conversations, structured interviews with over 30 people who've either business owners, small business owners, or those who've worked with small businesses in this area in different roles through their careers. So there's a you know, big well of experience, and you know, those barriers that I listed before, you know, the top one was that time challenge, you know, and we've had this, you know, Andy, you and I have had a discussion about whether it's a perceived time barrier or it's an actual time barrier. But you know, either way, it's a barrier, and so that's really important. And this lack of understanding, you know, hearing more about climate change mentioned in the news, but not really being able to understand how that translates to their business, what they need to be concerned about, and how and where they could take action. So yeah, so it was. I think the other important point was in those conversations, there was a lot of common views expressed. So we can be, you know, pretty confident that we've identified the key barriers.
Sure.
And the other point, actually, I should make one other thing, and this has informed the approach, is the fact that you know, there will be common sort of situations for different businesses, but we've got to make sure as well as we can to provide information or advice that is as specific as it can be to the particular business situation, because that's the way we're going to you know, make it stick for them and get them to do it, and you know, get them on the road, get them taking that first step, and then keeping along, making, you know, going down that pathway.
Sure thing. And when we talked about the CO2 labs, I believe they're sort of built on the similar model that we've done at other workshops around the country, particularly on plastics and stuff like that, where we're getting a really nice formalized process and kind of trying to road show them to different locations. Can you give an idea of kind of the experience, what they're going to experience when they sign up and come to those?
Yeah, sure. So we've currently got 4 planned, all being well with lockdown, being released in 4 main centres, so Auckland, Tauranga, Wellington, Christchurch, in sort of September, October time. And these will be half-day workshops. So they'll be very much focused on practical action that businesses can take. So we'll be having workshops on, you know, how you might understand your emissions and measure how you might take action in the different you know, priority areas of as I say, transport, energy use, waste, etc. Begin to understand the importance of supply chain and how your business is having an impact through your supply chain. So we'll be involved obviously in delivering them. We'll also have input from some of our expert partners and members in this space. So we've got plenty, Toy2, Ecos, ECA obviously, and many others who we will think step an important part of that, because they'll be helping us in terms of designing up these events.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. We've certainly had a lot of fun with the plastics events over the last few months, and I'm really enjoying that format and everyone kind of working together. It's very much kind of, I always describe it as it's moved on from the let's turn up and eat biscuits kind of approach to people turning up with their sleeves rolled up, ready to kind of go home with real concrete work to do. Which is fantastic. So just one final question, and then I'll wrap up, which is just, what should an SME do right now if they're watching this? What's the first thing they should do to jump on board to this thing, and what's the easy access?
Yeah, go to our website, download the report, get your, we'll take your details, and then we'll keep you updated on what we're doing, and begin to think about the sorts of things that we've covered today. The report will give a good, introduction to the problem and the opportunities.
Awesome. So that's sustainable.org.nz. You can jump on there. The stuff will be highlighted as what you can find out from us. Just remains to me to say thank you very much for coming along and watching with us. Thanks also again to our first sponsors on this, the kind of pioneers that have jumped on with us with Genless through ECA and Waka Kotahi NZ Transport Agency that are backing this and helping us to get the message out and give you the support you need. Our next event for Sustainable Business Network is our Shout Out on Tuesday, which is around marketing and comms. You can find information on that on the website also, and sign up as we continue. Stay with us, stay in touch, and you can contact us direct anytime to ask questions, find out more, and get involved. Thanks again. Cheers now.
Thanks very much.